Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective, Two Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax.
Hi.
Hi. We're going to talk about complicated relationships today.
Yes. Or maybe not so complicated. Relationships we make complicated?
Ooh, that's deep. Or we said before we started, like, isn't any relationship kind of complicated?
Right. Yeah.
Or not. I mean, it's funny because like I was kind of, I sent you a voicemail this morning and was kind of like venting a little bit. And I was actually talking to you about a couple of relationships in my life that have been somewhat challenging for me. And was reflecting on the fact that I do have some relationships in my life that are relatively uncomplicated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful for those. My relationship with you is one. My relationship with my husband is one. My relationship with my child is one. Thank God, because otherwise I probably would need to be in a padded room somewhere, like legit.
Yeah. Well, right. And so I think sometimes like relationships can be complicated by numerous factors, right? Sometimes it's within our control, sometimes maybe it's not. And maybe you can't always spot them. Because sometimes relationships become complicated, right? That didn't used to be.
That is so true. That is so true. I've had that experience so many times where
Yeah.
things seem so simple at some point, and then it's like, what happened? How did things get twisty feeling in this relationship? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, this comes up a lot. I don't think my clients necessarily say this is a complicated relationship, but they'll say something and be like, relationships are so complicated, like maybe it's anything or it's navigating relationships. But yeah, what are your thoughts on maybe what makes it complicated, or what are you hearing from clients? It comes up a lot for me in my sessions.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things to work with people in therapy is relationship issues. I think it's so intriguing, so interesting. No two people are the same. And if you think of how many different aspects of personality we each have, it's no wonder that when we connect with another human that has just as many or more aspects of personality as far as likes or dislikes or just ways of being in the world, histories for better or for worse, hopes, dreams, fears, aspirations, hopes, I said hopes already, goals, right? Like how, of course we have difficulty connecting or meshing, right? And I think that for some it might be more difficult than others, and maybe we can talk about that. But it almost seems like if you take that into consideration, it's amazing that any relationship is easy.
No, true.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the conversation I have a lot with people is you come with your history, your stuff, your wounds. The other person comes with theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if it's the right mixture of baggage and wounds, it's like I think some people poke each other's wounds accidentally more than others. It's just the combination, right? It's almost like a crapshoot of, well, your baggage happens to be my triggers and here we go.
Right.
Right. And then I think when it comes to family dynamics, you're dealing with dynamics that have been around for so long that, as a kid, you may not have recognized, and now you're an adult, right? So you view the world differently, you view relationships differently, and then that may no longer jive, right? That your expectations of others, or maybe your expectations of relationships don't meet, I don't know, the rules and the guidelines that your family had in place around those.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Right.
Grow up. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you saw things going down in your family and you said, well, that doesn't work for me. I don't want that dynamic in my relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so you consciously make an effort to have very different relationships, for example.
Right.
But now you're kind of like breaking that family's way of being.
Yes, that's also one of my favorite populations to work with. I love working with people. Usually, this is like in the 20s, right? Where people kind of have enough space away from that family of origin to be able to look back or look at it kind of, with some perspective to see, hmm, that's interesting. I never realized that was happening, or I did never think about it that way, right? Or, I don't think I want to do that anymore or the same way. Um, Sometimes I do want to do things the same way. Those typically aren't the people who need to work through things on my
Yeah.
couch.
Right.
Right. But I love that, right? This kind of the 20s kind of phase of differentiating, right? And it can start earlier or it can be later in life too. I've seen this at all ages, but it seems to be a very common thing that kind of is developmentally appropriate kind of in the 20s, which is a really fun time, I guess, for me to be able to work with a client.
So I don't remember like
Was
that
that fun
time
for
being
you?
so, no. It's a lot of growing, and growing can be painful and uncomfortable. And I mean, I definitely had a lot of fun too, but I don't
Mhm.
think it's the cleanest age and stage of our life span. Yeah. So, it's interesting because I when I work with individuals, obviously I'm hearing one side of the story.
Yeah.
And so I tell my clients this, like, well, your partner, your parents, your whoever, blank, fill in the blank, has another perspective and it may not be yours, right? It may not be shared. Um, and I have a lot of conversations with people. And I mean, this is a frustrating point in my life too. I think it's the frustrating part of, I don't know, being a social species and having to communicate with each other is I cannot control what you hear or don't hear or how
Yeah.
you hear it, and I may say something that I think is very clear and you may completely interpret it differently than I intended.
Right.
Right. And I think we're very much the way our brains work. We shortcut, we code, we don't always focus on details.
Hmm.
Right. We take our own experiences, our own perceptions, and we decode what someone says to us and say, I got it. But like we don't often stop to verify that we actually did indeed get it because we just assume, oh, I know exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Um,
Or what you mean, or what you're intending, or what you're trying to communicate, what you're not saying, right? That's another big
oh
one, right? All
yeah,
these
yeah,
assumptions people make, right? And we
yes,
do it. We're not immune to that, right? As therapists, we make assumptions about things based on other people's behavior. I was just talking to you this morning about ways I judge um, importance, right? What somebody else believes to be important based on their communication patterns, right? Which is
mhm.
based on my value system. It's not necessarily what that other person's truth is, right? They could have a whole host of other things, but I prioritize things based on importance to me. And so then therefore I assume that all other people must do the same.
Yeah, I mean, and so maybe that's what makes relationships complicated. Value systems being different, right? We all see the world through our own eyes. It's easy for me to make
Mhm.
the assumption that everyone views friendships and relationships the same way I do, but that is not, in fact, the case.
Right.
Right? And different people need different things from those friendships and relationships.
Yes.
Some people need more contact, some people are fine with less, right? There's a spectrum of all these things. So maybe one of our hurdles is differing values.
Hmm.
I think the struggle is, can we hold space for someone's value without feeling like we're right and they're wrong? Like, right? But yes, there are differing values of how much do I value responding to someone? How much do I value phone calls? How much do I value all these things? And I think the struggle is we do not form relationships and have these conversations,
Right.
right? Like, I only want to talk to someone once a year and that's my friend versus I need to talk to you weekly. I think we just establish patterns and hope they work, but I think we don't often give feedback and then we're frustrated when someone's not living up to our expectations.
Okay, so let's talk about that idea of feedback because that's always something that I really wrestle with in my personal life. And I know how I coach my clients,
Is it the
but
same? No.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So this idea of feedback, what I have found to be true based on my personal experience on this planet is that most people, barring those that I am in the most intimate relationships with, which would be my husband or my child, they can receive feedback very well. And course correct, explain. We can kind of like just talk through stuff easily, right? Most other humans on the planet that I have experienced in my lifetime, only 43 years in, not halfway yet, theoretically, or maybe I'm getting close, don't receive feedback well at all. And in fact, feedback can be the kiss of death for a relationship, even if it seems as though it's now friendship or let's say work relationship, acquaintance, right? I'm not talking about like this is my life partner, my spouse, right? I think those relationships sometimes are more deeply entwined, so that those cords are more difficult to break. But for more surface relationships, friendships, collegial relationships, neighbors, acquaintances, even I've seen a trend, this is disturbing to me, but maybe a rabbit hole, a topic for a different day, with adult children and their parents, where the relationship cords seem to be much more tenuous, much more easily broken. And so that feedback, right? Any tainting of the water, any spitting in the soup, that things are not perfect, that maybe you've hurt my feelings in a way, or I'm not getting what I need, or it's too much of this, too little of that, whatever the feedback is, again, even if it seems to be that the actual delivery is received in a moment, can create like a life altering shift in the relationship that sometimes ends up in eventually leading to the relationship just dissolving altogether.
Yeah, because there's a fragility there, right? And I think when we say, because when you give that feedback of, I need this from you, right? Or I need more of this, what other people hear is criticism,
Right.
and potentially not rejection, but like some criticism and some judgment. Yeah. And then on the flip side, I give the feedback and nothing changes. And now I'm like, well, now I told you this hurts my feelings. Now I told you I struggle with this. Now I told you this is my trigger, and you're continuing to do it. So now I feel completely disregarded and invalidated. Right. And that's part of what I see in relationship work is that little bit of flavor.
Yeah.
Right. Like I have that conversation, nothing changes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I get the dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue then maybe you're not in a great relationship at that, right? For if you want a close, intimate relationship, like you get to say, this is my struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Can we work with this? But yeah, I mean, I don't know if giving feedback works across the board either.
You know, I mean, it seems like it creates, like you said, this sense of like criticism or fragility. Like I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I don't know what to do. I don't know the right way to be, or like I've done something wrong, which can be triggering for people, right? If they've, like been, let's say, childhood maybe was an environment where they felt was a punitive environment, right? Where they were held to standards and they were punished for not meeting standards. And oh God, here I am as an adult and somebody says I didn't do it perfectly. Oh my God, right? That could be incredibly triggering.
Yeah.
For adults, right? And then you want to just like flee, freeze. I don't want to be in it anymore, or fight, right? That fight response, like back, right? Because we're triggered by receiving the feedback.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and that's a self-awareness thing, and some people are more self-aware than others. I do think there is a way to deliver feedback that is not putting the blame on someone else. If I know that I'm triggered by something, right? If I'm triggered by a tone, for example, for me to say, to someone, and I'm not talking people in the periphery, like I'm talking about a friendship I value and am close to, because I don't know if I would spend this energy nurturing kind of more distant relationships, because it wouldn't impact me the same way. But to say, hey, like I have my own shit around this, right? And this, like, I really struggle with people's tones. And I know you probably don't even mean it, right? It's just, it's a tone, but it's my thing. It's my issue. Like, can we come up with a way to work around that? Right? Or when you don't respond to me, I don't feel like you're listening. Can you just, even if it's a you know, I mean, those are conversations Adam and I've had. I'm like, can you like respond? He's like, I
Hello.
hear you. He's like, I hear you. I don't really have anything to contribute to that statement. And I'm like,
Right.
but like a normal person says something, right?
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
so we've had, but, and I don't say it like that because that is not the type of feedback I'm talking about. Right. But to say like, can you just respond so that I can register that you
Right.
received that message? And if you have nothing to say, that's fine. But
Mhm.
like even an okay or huh or interesting, I don't know, all the filler words, right? Like let's do filler words. But you can say, you can own your own stuff around that. You can say, this is a me issue.
Yeah.
Can you help me out with this? And that's very different than me saying, you never whatever, or you always do this, or you need to do this more and that less. Like that I get feels defensive. But I do think if we own that it's an us, because this is the other reality, it is a me problem.
Right.
You know, if the other person's values are different, or they interpret this relationship as perfect the way it is, and I feel like, it's not quite working for me, it is a me problem. It's not a
Yeah.
them problem. They don't even know the problem exists.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to, I think, when we give feedback, maybe it's not even feedback, maybe it's ownership of our own stuff in the relationship,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate on that a little bit, right? So if we do recognize that it is our own stuff, because this is where I tend to land, right? I will tend to keep it inside and just ride it out. Because my thought process is exactly what you said. There's nothing inherently wrong. If this is what she wants our relationship to be like, there's nothing right or wrong about that, right? And I can't make her want it to be anything different.
Yes.
So I can either blow it up and say, no, thank you, I don't want this, or I can just take it for what it is, ride it out, ride with it, and then, use my support system, use my coping skills to manage my reactions to being in this relationship with someone else who is giving me what they want to give me, and it creates feelings for me, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think that's what most people do. Right. Except for the people who are in our offices saying, I don't know how to deal with this relationship. Right. Or they're so frustrated, or they're so hurt by it.
Right.
Right. That they're not able to process it on their own. But I think most people do that. They either communicate it and course correct, or they say it's a me issue and I need to do the internal work to manage this differently for myself, whatever that looks like. But I think that's exactly what most people do. Right? You kind of weigh, is it worth the feedback? I mean, this is the other conversation I have a lot with clients. Sometimes in these conversations, it's what would change a situation, what would make the relationship better? What do you want out of this? And it's like, well, change the other person and all these like attributes that person has never possessed. But if only they were more communicative, less judgmental, more open, warmer, fuzzy, whatever description they have, then it would be better for me. And I get that. And this is what I said to you before we started recording is, okay, but has that person ever been that? And it's like, well, no. It's like, so I get it would be awesome if they completely 180'd into a different person, but this person is this way. They're showing you who they are and what they are. And obviously I'm a firm believer in people changing. That's why I do this job, but I'm also a firm believer in that's a choice. And I know it's work. And not everyone wants to go down that path, to grow, to adjust, to be different. Right. So honoring where someone is in any given moment. Okay, well, now you have to make a choice of how do I relate to this person given who they are right now, because that's what you're dealing with. Right. because I think again, we're like, well, if they would just be different, right? So and this is where I think the feedback doesn't work. I'm giving you feedback so you turn into a different person, so then I'll be good.
Right.
That's why it doesn't land.
Right.
Saying, this is my issue, this is my sticking point, this is my wound.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't jab at it as best as you can, right? They're going to step on landmines. It happens. But like, please be mindful of it is a very different request from someone who cares about you than you need to be a different person for me to like you and get along with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Because I think typically people, right. I think, typically people are who they are. Right.
Yes.
I mean, I think that, I don't know, this is tricky, right? It is tricky. Why does it seem different? I guess, so if you think about like a romantic relationship, right? The majority of relationship counseling that happens is in the context of a romantic partnership. Sometimes we have parent-children, right?
Mhm.
But those are both primary attachment relationships.
Yes.
You typically don't have friendships come in. I mean, outside the context of maybe like EAP work, you don't have like coworker relationships, coming to therapy, like my office suite mate like hurts my feelings, right? Like you just decide that, Betty's going to chew loud and wear perfume you don't like. And it's just what it is, man. Maybe next year you'll get a promotion.
I want someone to build a practice just on like couples counseling with friendships because there's not I'll tell you why.
Tell me why.
Because they're not as intimate, potentially. And maybe in the context of survival, right? Like if you go from like a biological perspective, like we need our parents to survive, specifically when we're born. Right. For procreation, you need a partner. So that's kind of wired in us on some level. You can replace a friend. I think it's more, I don't want to say disposable, but maybe less instinctually driven for survival than those primary attachments, because people often recreate the primary attachment to your parents is often the one that influences your romantic relationships.
Yes.
Right? Either you're repeating patterns or completely trying to course correct patterns, but it's all coming from this original attachment relationship.
Right.
I think friendship relationships sit in a different space somehow. I work with a lot of people that have so many reactions to their romantic partner and feel so triggered or so maybe sensitive to their partner's behaviors, but do not carry the same feelings in friendship relationships. So I do think maybe there can be different attachments to different types of people in our life based on who they are. I wonder if anyone studied that. I actually don't know the answer to that, but I do see it. I see people that have great friendships and crappy romantic relationships, right? Why is that? They can form a relationship. They can form an attachment to people. It's something about that romantic, vulnerable relationship that's a struggle. I also think people are, again, more likely to, I think we're triggered more in romantic relationships, which is why we end up in therapy in those romantic relationships. And I think we're also more likely to really try to hold on to those and save them. So we'll go to therapy for that. If it's like a friendship, maybe you're like, I don't know. Okay, not that your feelings don't get hurt, not that you're sad, but I don't know. I would love someone to call me, be like, I'm coming to therapy with my friend. I would love that. Like, I don't even know. I don't know. I'm kind of digging it. I'm sure, I just think it's different. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with everything you've been said. I mean, you've been said. Everything you have been said. I agree.
We speak English well on this podcast. Yikes.
For a living, we speak English. Yeah, it is scary. No, everything you said is right on. I agree. There's so much like neurobiology that comes into play, right? I mean, humans have always been monogamous. We have partnered with one person to keep ourselves alive. And when that one person appears to be gone, there's a panic response because the brain thinks we're going to die, right? And that one person is, for an adult, the spouse, and for a child, the primary caregiver, and for a parent, their children, right? It's we're yes, I have to keep myself alive, but I have to keep these small things alive as well, right? And so then yes, when there's a perceived absence, rift, right, an emotional or physical disappearance of that person, right? So you're not meeting my need, or you're not responding to my bids for attention or bids for affection, or I don't know where you are, man. You're supposed to be home at X o'clock and you're not home. Panic response comes up, right? Because the brain's saying, danger, Will Robinson, this is absolutely not okay. Everybody's going to die now. So react, right? Keep yourself alive, keep your loved ones alive, right? And so that's why we go into fight or flight so fast. I agree with you. It's interesting. I there's also another side of the coin, though, that we see sometimes, right? Which is perhaps more complex because it's not as easily normalized through biology, is what we just described, where if someone has had a trauma with a caregiver, relationships with the opposite sex sometimes are safer, and relationships with this gender of the person who was the perpetrator of the trauma are often more triggering, right? And so that could look like lots of things. It kind of like shakes up this baseline of like, well, people are more reactive in their romantic partnerships and work harder for those, come to therapy sometimes. So let's imagine, right, that for a guy, his dad was abusive, right? He might really struggle with male relationships, whereas he might do just fine in his marriage or with his sister, or, he might be the guy who's like, it's fine hanging out with the girls at the book club, so trauma sometimes can inform, again, like you said, like our reactivity, and therefore like where we're most comfortable in relationships too, I think.
Well, yeah, because your schema on what's safe and what isn't changes based on your experiences, right? So your template that you're building throughout your life is like, well, that, this gender is not safe or has not been safe. So now I gravitate towards this other gender because that's my safe space. Yeah. But now you know why it's so complicated, because you meet that guy and you don't know, or you do know, maybe he's like, yeah, my dad was a real jerk growing up and he was abusive. And you're like, oh, okay, that's so sad. But most people, and this is, I think we have very different conversations about this stuff than the average person, because I would hear that and be like, that's going to impact the way he navigates relationships. How can it not?
Yeah.
But the average person isn't doing that. Right. Even on a really simple level, when I work with couples, we have a lot of conversations about what was your life like growing up? What were your parents like? What was their marriage like? Why does that matter? Because that's what you saw. That was your foundation for what a marriage was like, for better or worse. And it doesn't always have to be major trauma that informs things.
Right.
It could be my parents never argued or disagreed. And so I don't know how to do that. And I assume if I'm arguing and disagreeing with my partner that it's over, because we should never argue.
Yeah.
Which is not a realistic goal, right?
Yeah.
But you can see where now that informs how you interact with relationships, right? So either conflict avoidant, right? So when someone says to you, hey, I need you to, acknowledge me a little bit more when I say X, Y, and Z or blah, whatever, you're like, oh, she's mad at me. Conflict avoidant. You go turtle, right? Right? Like, she hates me. We're done.
Right.
But you can see why every relationship can potentially feel complicated. This is what we're bringing into it.
Yes. Bunch of landmines, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we shortcut. Like, most of us don't enter relationships going, oh, that's your history. right? That's
Because
why
that would be
people come
so
to therapy.
weird, though. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing, and maybe we do in romantic relationships, right? I mean, I think Rob and I did this way back in the day. It's been so long now. It's been even longer for you and Adam. But I hear couples, or sometimes individuals when I work with them and they're new in a relationship, like, oh yeah, we talked for like 4 hours. It's like those are the things you begin to talk about, right? In the first 3 to 6 months is like,
Yeah, you hear them, but you're not going, well, that could be a red flag, or that might push my button in 6.
right.
You hear that, but you're also like, full of like hormones and endorphins, and you're
Right.
through a filter that may or may not be accurate, because that thing that you were like, oh yeah, he said his dad was really, emotionally detached and whatever. Yeah, it's just the dad of the 80s, or however you want to, quantify that. And then you go fast forward 10 years, you're like, God, he's so emotionally detached. Well, shit. Because you heard it,
Right. You
but
just
you didn't think about what it would mean.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So yeah, we
Yeah.
have these conversations, but we just kind of like note it and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's, I think, because when couples come to us, these are the things we dive into, that because normal people don't dive into this, because it's kind of what we're trained to do. It's what we're trained to look at. So I get that people don't have these conversations or don't register things the same way. And maybe it kicks us in the butt a little too, because maybe we get too analytical about stuff. Maybe we hear too much in every statement that, maybe we should let go of more. I'm open to the possibility that then we get too in the weeds, right?
Well, but that does bring up a good point, right? Because if you see some of these red flags, let's use that term, right? How do you know? What are you going to do? The longer I'm on the planet, the longer I just want to be at my house with my dog. Like, how do you know, right, when to stay and when to go? How long to hold on? How long to fight for a relationship? And again, this is all going to be dependent, right, on how primary that relationship is. Is it your parent? Is it your child? Is it your spouse? Or is it, the neighbor or the gal from carpool or your coworker or whatever, right? Like, that's difficult. But in all fairness, it could be a friend, it could be a sibling, it could be a stepchild, it could be like a cousins, right? Sometimes people have relationships where they are valuable, but they're not primary,
Yeah.
right? And if you're seeing some of these red flags, literally, if you, because you and I, we've been doing this shit a while, man. If we were to put down everybody's psychological profile on a piece of paper that we met, let's just say, okay, our kids are starting a new class this year, right? Your kid's going to a new school this year. You're getting ready to meet 20 to 30 new women.
I'm scared of what you're going to say, because if anyone hears this, going to be like, she's assessing me. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I only get paid to assess. I'm not assessing.
That's right.
Okay.
We don't have to work that hard. But if we did, right? If we sat down and we said, okay, these are some of the things that I'm interpreting about this person's psychological profile, right? Or i.e. their personality, right? And whether it's going to work well with mine. Like, how do you know? Like, how about you're like, okay, well, you know what? Like, she tends to be more extrovert. I tend to be more introvert. Is that going to work well? Is it not? I don't know. Like, she likes red wine. I like white wine. Like, is that going to work well? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, where is the divergence in a relationship a deal breaker?
Yeah.
Right. And particularly, I think, well, we could talk about romantic relationships, primary relationships, and we can talk about, let's just say, secondary relationships. Maybe we'll coin this term. We'll write our book about it one day.
Yeah. I think for primary relationships, because I think that's where most people get red flagged, right? Let's face it, it's in a romantic relationship, because there's a lot more chemistry that goes into those relationships than, the moms at school. You either like them, you don't, you connect, you don't. It's like, you can keep them at a distance, be like, we're nice, we're cordial, but we're not that close. But I do think in romantic relationships, it's different, because you have a lot of hormones that kind of cloud judgment potentially,
Right.
or you do, period. So I think that's where people start to say, yeah, there was this red flag, but I didn't acknowledge it, or it was a yellow flag and I wasn't sure if it was going to go green or go red.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think the first thing is to have, which this is so age dependent, but like you have to have some kind of sense of yourself.
Yeah.
Do I value myself? What are my expectations on how people value me and show me affection, attention, love?
Mm-hmm.
What am I willing to tolerate and what am I not? Because I think obviously there's like a honeymoon period early on where people will show you their best side, but even in that, it's not always all great.
Yeah.
Like when someone shows you who they are, believe that's who they are. And I think so often we're like, oh no, but like that was just that one time,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
not, they didn't mean that. And it's like, but it doesn't always go away. So when you start to see stuff that doesn't feel right early on,
Mm-hmm.
trust that to be true. And not everything's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have a lot of conversations around the love languages, and people will say to me, well, mine is act of service and his is this and theirs is that. And I'm like, okay, so sometimes you don't align on that. So someone may be showing you affection by bringing you gifts on the regular or telling you look beautiful, but you're like, I just want you to do the dishes. And that would really work for me. That is not a red flag worthy of killing the relationship, right? That's like they're showing you affection. It's just not in a way that you understand. That can be course corrected. But I started dating this guy and then he stopped calling for 3 weeks and then he called back and here I am again. Why did you do that? He didn't call you for 3 weeks. Without sounding mean, you weren't that important during those 3 weeks. So he was either preoccupied with something else that didn't work out, or he's not that interested, or he's bored.
Mm-hmm.
He showed you weren't that important.
Right.
Why are we not listening? But so much of why we ignore red flags is our own stuff. I don't want to be alone. Maybe this is as good as it gets, but he's really great when I'm with him. So when you start to find that you're like talking yourself out of stuff or talking yourself into stuff, like that's probably a good sign that this is not going to work long term, because the flags don't go away. They just morph into other things that make you mad later on.
Okay, so where's the line? I can reflect on my own relationship, and I know how I coach clients. There are certain things that can be molded, shaped, altered, even extinguished, right? Behaviors that can be eliminated. And then there are other things that will not change.
It has to do with what you can tolerate.
Okay.
Like, what is the deal break? But this is where you have to know yourself, right? I can quote unquote fix a lack of response by saying, "Hey, yo,
hello,
hello,
I'm talking to you.
hello."
My house.
It's not such a big deal that I'm like, this is never going to work. For someone else, it might be.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, if that were a trigger, right? If you never felt heard as a child, if you felt neglected or alone or overlooked or abandoned, man. Yes. And then you're married and there's a dude across the kitchen table doesn't respond when you talk to him. Like it is over tonight.
And it might be. And for some, right? And for some people, that might be it. But that's where it's so, you really have to say, and this is what I tell people. I'm like, if it were to stay just like this forever and always, would you be okay with that? And some people say, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's annoying, but those little things that are a little annoying at the beginning. I mean, let's face it, that were cute at the beginning become annoying later on too, potentially, right? The thing you found so endearing. She's so type A and such a go-getter. And now it's like, why can't you chill out?
Right.
Why are you always go-getting, right? So even the things we adored can become annoying later on. The things you thought were annoying in the beginning do not become cuter as you move through life. If the cute things are now annoying, the annoying things are still there. But yes, not every irritating behavior is the reason to cut someone loose. But am I okay with this? Or is this a non-negotiable? I can't answer that for people. Like, that's where you have to sit and be like, okay, so I constantly feel like I am the 10th priority. can I live with that? And listen, if you can, I work with people who are like, you know what? I'm cool being second or third on someone's list because I value my independence so much that I actually don't want to be the center of the universe for someone.
Right.
And I work with other people that are like, I absolutely need to be priority number one. That's what makes me feel safe and secure. There is
Right.
no right answer to that. But that person that needs to be number one needs to find someone that will make them number one. The person that's fine being second, third, fourth needs to find someone who wants to be in a relationship, right? Where they also have enough going on that that person becomes second, third, fourth, right? You can find your person. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just really understanding, like, how do I operate and what do I need in this?
Mm-hmm. And I think to some degree, right? And tell me what you think about this. You know, Marsha Linehan writes in her DBT handbook a 3-step approach to handling distressing situations. The first step is to try to change the situation, right? And, you know, in DBT, that can be a job, it can be a housing situation, it could be a financial situation, it could be a health situation, it can be a relationship. And then if we are unable to do that, if and only if we're unable to change it, then we change our reaction to it. And then if and only if we're unable to do either one or two, then we accept both as they are. Ooh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to that point, right, if we think of like, okay, I'm in a romantic relationship, my tentacles are entwined with this person, right? He or she is very important to me, and maybe over time there's some extrinsic factors tying you together too. You got a plant together, you got a dog together, you got a water filter together, you got an apartment lease, you know. Then eventually you got kids and a mortgage and a 401k and all that shit too, right? So like I'm invested, man.
Mm-hmm.
If I want something to be different, can I ask for that? Right? Going back to this piece about offering feedback, right? So, yeah. Should we try? Should we try to see? Can I ask you to not make that noise or do that thing or look at me this way or not look at me this way or fill in the blank?
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
again, I think that's your starting place. Hey, this is my thing. Don't do that.
I don't like that.
Right? I don't like it.
Right.
Or this bothers me. Or this, you know, those I statements, right?
Mhm.
Or what I messages that we had, right?
Yes.
I feel frustrated when you don't
Mhm.
respond when I said something with a, you know, filler word. Okay. Yes, you absolutely should do that. Because you're assuming someone operates by the same code of life that you do.
I'm over here laughing because you and I know I I introduced this concept to a guy who came to see me for brief therapy. Maybe 4 sessions is all he really needed. Maybe 6. I can't remember. A few months back. And he was having not a lot, but a little bit of interpersonal conflict with his wife. And we talked about these I statements. And I remember suggesting that he catch in the moment, right? Before he goes to 100, right? Or hits red, say, you know, I'm feeling frustrated because when I did this, you did that. And that kind of, you know, he was like, do people actually do that in the moment? And I was like, I mean, not really, no.
Adam's like, who talks like that? Nobody
Yeah,
talks like that.
it doesn't look like that in my kitchen usually. I mean, you know, I can teach it,
No,
right?
it's you drove me nuts and you pissed me off because you did X, Y, Z.
Mhm,
But okay, so yeah, there it's therapist talk. I get
right.
it.
We
But
probably,
the concept behind them is
yeah,
valuable.
right.
And people misuse I statements all the time. Right? Like
You're an asshole.
when you do this, I feel, right? Like you can spin them. It's meant to disarm the person, but you can definitely use an statement with a little dagger attached. It's true, right?
Mhm.
But I think, yes, getting back to you absolutely should communicate your needs because again, most relationship conflict is because someone isn't communicating what they need and is sitting on it and doing some passive aggressive shit because they're mad, right? versus just saying it. And sometimes just stating your frustration is what's needed. The situation doesn't always have to change. Sometimes it's just being able to express where you're at with something that allows you to move through it. And then learning how do you communicate with your partner in a way that makes it productive and not problematic. Because I think that's the other sticking point, that when people come to us, right, it's we can't communicate effectively with each other in these conversations at home because it turns into a fight. So we need a third party to kind of help us navigate these conversations.
Yeah. There's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And that probably, going back to your point, right, is why we see more couples, romantic couples or parent-child relationships in our offices, because in friendships or acquaintances, if you have a fight, you're probably like, all right, like, I'm out for this. Like, this is too much.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be fun and you're not fun anymore. So on to the next mom at carpool.
Yeah. Well, we have different standards around it, right? Different standards about, you expect things from your romantic partner that you don't expect from somebody else in your life.
Yeah.
You expect,
Everything.
Yeah, I mean, you
everything.
expect
Yeah.
their support, their response, their validation, and things
Yeah.
that, you don't expect from your friends, and if the further out relationships go, you have fewer expectations of the people you're less close to, right? So that's why those, I think, come into our office, because it hurts more. It's more uncomfortable. It's causing more problems.
Right.
You are more connected. You're more tied together, but I think it's communicating. I think you absolutely should communicate your need. And as I always tell my clients, but that also means they get to do the same back.
Yeah.
So you're dishing out feedback. You have to also get comfortable with receiving said feedback or feedback from them. It's not a one-way street, right? I think it's understanding that everyone views the world through their lens and their perspective and their own filter.
Right.
So don't assume what you say is heard with the intention or the message that you thought would be heard. Don't assume they know what you need, or that they're not doing something you do need, or that they're doing something that hurts your feelings. If you're not saying it, they are blissfully unaware.
Right.
Right. So I think that's an important factor too,
That's
again,
one of my favorite bubbles to burst.
Is what?
If I had a nickel for every time, it's usually a young woman will say something to the effect of, don't you think he should know that?
Oh, I burst that one too. People
Nope.
probably are like, damn,
Absolutely
that therapist.
not. No, doesn't work that way.
Yes.
People are not equipped with miracle balls, magic balls. What is it called? Crystal balls.
Crystal balls.
That's what those balls are.
Yes. Right. And they don't mind read,
Mm-hmm.
and know they shouldn't know, and know it is not obvious.
Right.
And again, everyone's viewing the world through their perspective. What is common sense or obvious to one person is not. You're putting the way you value and navigate relationships as their template, and that is probably not their template.
Right. That's right.
Right? You're saying, this is how I view friendships and relationships, so everyone should too. And we know that's not true. Like cognitively, we're like, that's obviously not true. But emotionally, we don't really want to acknowledge that, because then we're like, but they hurt my feelings. It's like, right,
well,
again.
You and I know that that's not true, right? But I would say that yes, you're right. What you just said is true. In fact, some of the things that I'm remembering venting to this morning on my morning Debbie Downer voice message were to that very effect, right? But like, not every human walking the planet knows that that is true, right? In fact, I would hazard to say we are probably rare in the fact that we do know that that's true, right? That we know because of our work in the world that everybody's built differently. Everybody has their own lens. Everybody's doing the best they can. And that everybody thinks things are fine until you say they're not. And then it's going to hurt their feelings if you say that it's not fine.
Yeah. And not everyone values friendships and relationships to the same extent and in the same way.
Right.
And I think you always have to ask yourself, and this doesn't always have to be a big blow up or a big fight. I believe in quiet distancing, where I just let it go. And it's not a discussion, and it's not a conversation, and it's not a big thing. It's just me deciding, I think we value things differently. and it agitates me to be in a relationship with someone that is making it not fulfilling, right? What's the point? This isn't, I don't call this a friendship. And so I just withdraw if I don't feel supported, depending on who it is. Obviously, my husband, we would have conversations, but again, you get to decide whether you're going to go along this ride with someone. And if you're like, I believe friends should communicate regularly, and you kind of have this whole narrative of what you think is important in a friendship, and you are friends with someone who doesn't do that, it doesn't mean they're a shitty person. It doesn't mean they're heartless. It just means they operate out of a different system. And maybe that's not a match for you at this point in your life. Because I also think I think what's hard with relationships is that they morph as we move through life, as our world and our ability to hold space for a lot of different people shrinks, right? You're married, you've got kids. It's like, it's harder to keep a lot of relationships as you get older. And when you're younger, things are kind of built in, you have more free time. So I think that's the other challenge, is recognizing that sometimes things ran their course, or maybe you view it differently today than you did 20 years ago, and that's okay. And maybe they view your relationship differently today than they did 20 years ago. And I think that just kind of happens.
Okay, so we've unearthed some really good topics to come back to. I feel like we could come back and circle around to so much that we touched on here, right? We could circle back around to, what are red flags? We could circle back around to, like, how would you effectively verbalize if you needed or wanted something? What are these I statements we're talking about, right?
Like, no one uses them anyway. I'm just kidding. Client feedback is like, nope. No, but they are helpful. And it is like fabricated way of communicating. I get it. But like, sometimes you have to move out of, I think why they work is because you're moving out of your normal into this like weird, awkward communication style. So it takes the emotion out of it. If both people are talking in a weird way.
Okay, so add our topic list, weird ways of talking to people. Good, we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to some of these topics, but I think that's a good place to start, right? This idea of getting really clear for yourself. How do you view relationships? What are your priorities? What are your deal breakers? Whatever those are, it's okay, but just know what they are, so you don't put yourself in a situation where it's deal breaker after deal breaker and you're tolerating it, but you're frustrated with them for being this way. And leaning into the fact that you can only change you and make adjustments internally. You can't change someone else's way of being or their behaviors. And so you have to decide, does that work for me? Does who you are, can I work with that? Not can I work that? Can I manage that? Can I make some shifts for myself to create space for the way you are?
Right. If we've asked and we've tried to, tweak it. In certain relationships, again, right? Not everyone's going to be the type of relationship where you have the depth to have those kind of negotiations, but some are going to be that way.
But even then, you have to decide, is that okay with me? Can I be in a relationship where I can't have these conversations? Am I okay with that? If you are, fine. That's okay. If it works for you, I don't care, right? It's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. But again, it's getting clear with yourself. What can I tolerate? What makes sense? Can I be in a relationship like this? And, if it's, that's fine with me, then it's fine. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's so profound. That might be the most profound thing you've said today. If it's fine with me, then it's fine.
Then it's fine. But then you wouldn't be in my office anyway.
Then you are a securely attached human and it's to be here.
It's fine. Well, it was good seeing you today.
I know. You too. I always like to see your face when we get to do this.
I know, me too. So hopefully I think this is a loaded topic. I think we could do like 8 hours on this, because this is like a majority. This is like the work we do, right? Whether it's family relationships, intimate relationships, like it's all relationships. So we could definitely go on forever, but I hope this was a good starting point to get people at least thinking, right? And make your lists of what works. Like, make a list of your expectations and your thoughts on this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are deal breakers? And that definitely is a topic we could come back to. Deal breakers, red flags, personality traits. We actually have that on our list of things that we want to talk about at some point.
We do.
Maybe next week. That'll be a nice segue after today.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.